Focusing on Nahuatl Spanish that has influenced Mexican Spanish compared to Castilian Spanish, I'm going to look at phonology and morphology. Basically, Nahuatl has 4 short vowels, A, E, I, and O. The vowels A, E, and I sound similar to Spanish, while O can sound like either a Spanish O or a U. Unlike in English, where cuter and cutter have different vowels, the vowels in Nahuatl don't change depending on what follows them. Nahuatl's CH, M, N, P, T, and Y are all pronounced like English. As in English, C represents an S sound when followed by E or I, but a K sound elsewhere. CU is pronounced KW like qua, just like Spanish, or English is QU, qua, like queen. Its inverse, UC, is the same sound at the end of a syllable. HU is pronounced like English W, like gua. It is reversed at the end of a syllable, so ow sounds like ow, and ew sounds like ew. H alone, when not part of CH, HU, or UH, may have represented a glottal stop, as in the Cockney pronunciation of bottle. The word bottle, B-O-T-T-L-E, bottle, or it may have sounded like English's H. But unlike English H, it's pronounced at the end of a syllable, ah. It isn't simply a vowel, but a vowel followed by a consonant. Before a vowel, L is the same as English or Spanish L. Before a consonant, or at the end of a word, however, it's neither dark, like English in full, nor clear, like Spanish L. It's a voiceless sound, like Welsh L. Yeah. This isn't important to understanding, though, and it can be pronounced like an English L without introducing confusion. Double L is an L, just a little bit longer, like Latin. It's not palatal, like Spanish, or single L, like in English. X is pronounced like the English sh. TL is pronounced T with the tongue held in a position for L. Dl, dl. TZ is pronounced like German t, t, or like in English TS, except that the T is pronounced even at the start of words. Many people would say the word czar or tsunami without the T, but some will say tsar or tsunami. Either way, in Nahuatl. Z is pronounced like the English S. I think we already went through that. When played out in vernacular speech, we see some regular changes. For example, D followed by an M regularly becomes an L. This is because the sides of the tongue are lowered, anticipating the following M, thereby changing the D to the L. Another regular change resulting from the fact that Nahuatl has no naturally occurring letter R, such that, for example, padre and madre become pagre and magre with a G. This is really interesting. What happens is that the Nahuatl speaker is trying to pronounce the Spanish R, but they make it guttural, and in anticipation of that, they draw the tongue back from the D to the G position. Incidentally, this is also found in Chile, and in Nicaragua, there were Nahuatl speakers as well. So we find that in Nicaragua too. Now moving on to the morphology, the research available regarding this is somewhat small, mainly because there hasn't been a huge amount of study on the Nahuatl people and language. There is some, but it's still pretty thin. But some information can be extracted from the examples of other parts of the Americas and used to show morphological differences between European Spanish and Latin American. On comparing the morphology of Spain's Spanish, Castilian, and Mexico's Spanish, the basic and most obvious difference would be the ways of making the sounds for the letters S, C, and Z. They are called the distinction ceseo and ceseo, or if I were in the majority of Spain, I would say distinción, ceseo, and ceseo, but I'm not. The distinction used in the majority of Spain, the C and the Z before vowels I or E are spoken as th, like the TH in think, but otherwise you would use the S sound. The letter S is always S. In the ceseo, or I should say the thetheo, the least common, they are all three spoken as th, to th in think. The last contrast is that of ceseo with an s. This is basically the form used in all of Latin America, where the s is always used, or I should say the s sound is always used for c, z, and z. Another interesting note is the hissing sound of s in Castilian that in the Americas is often, though not always, and not necessarily Mexican form, since Mexican Spanish is known for a solid sibilant sound. It is replaced with a breathed H, and in some areas it's completely dropped. This is often found in the Caribbean and Central America. However, some areas of Spain also do this. So when we speak about the living being, what we're talking about here, a language, there are no hard lines. There's a constant flux and fluidity. So the truth is that as these pages are written, the language we call Spanish or Castilian is morphing. So that's the case when we talk about any language, and the fact is there are always exceptions to the rules. One of the most obvious examples of a difference that is still emerging in the Americas, including Mexico, is that of the voceo, vos. Vos is replaced by tú in the Americas, and usted is present as well for formal speak to one's elders or more official situations like a courtroom or even a doctor's office. When I talk to a doctor in Spanish, I don't say tú, I say usted. However, in Argentina, in some pocket areas or populations, like in my family where they were raised going to Jesuit schools in Nicaragua, they use, or previously used, vos, unless they have relearned this in their social training. Vos is often used in Spain, while in the Americas we would use tú in its place. But, of course, again, there are exceptions to all of these assertions. I have a friend from Madrid, and she always used to say vos until she had lived in California for a few years. Now it seems she goes back and forth between the two. It may be that she's adjusting for her interlocutor, as we all do at times. An interesting note, Ferry says something that is not widely known outside of or even within the Spanish America is that the voceo is part of the linguistic repertory of every Spanish American country except Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. This lack of knowledge is probably due to the sociolinguistic differences that characterize the use of the voceo in the different areas. He also explains that the voceo is sometimes relegated to the lower classes or familiar people, saving the tuteo for foreigners and school, except for in Argentina, where vos is used at all times, and all social levels and situations. I know no modern Mexican Spanish speakers who use voceo. My mother does not use it anymore either. She's been here for over 50 years. So I did not know it was part of the Latin American repertory. That's pretty neat. One final comparison point regarding Spanish's overall structure in Spain versus Mexico, or Nahuatl influenced Spanish, is the casual speech use of, quote, pragmatic expressions, end quote, of people through levels of society and areas of the Americas. The point is, common knowledge, it's commonly known among Latinos and through historical understanding that in South and Central America, the closer one is to the equator, the more African influence there is on top of the indigenous influences. It's also well known to Latinos and Hispanos that Argentina is considered more cosmopolitan than essentially the rest of Latin America. That being so, it could also mean that much of the Caribbean culture is more casual, and one could make the assumption that Argentina's Spanish has more Castilian structure and vocabulary than that of Spanish in Mexico. However, in the Americas as a whole, the Spanish that's spoken closer to the coastlines and historically involved in commerce through the seas is more aligned to the Andalusian Spanish. And they believe it's because they were basically the largest population of Spain to come over to the Americas. And as children are generally taught their language by their mothers, the Madre España or Madre Español is what the children were taught. And it's pretty neat because what they end up seeing or noticing is that the Mexico City Spanish might be more Castilian influenced than Andalusian, but the Andalusian affected the Spanish of the coastlines and everything pretty much closer to the equator where, sadly, but reality, there was a slave trade. It's a probability, but as we see over and over, it may exist, but with moderate amounts of room for fluidity, that the influence was more from Andalusia as opposed to Castilla. An interesting note to support this is that in no Spanish spoken in the Americas is the distinction or thetheo present. and vosotros was replaced by ustedes, which are both features of Andalusian. So we do know for certain that along the timeline of history, these features were dropped for some reason or another in the Americas. Pretty neat. Our supposition from this cursory research is that Mexican influence Nahuatl is in many ways still very much like the Spanish in Spain, except for the large, rich source of vocabulary that my classmate Ross is covering. This is neat stuff and very interesting, and there needs to be much more research done, especially as these languages are being spoken by less and less people. It is beautiful to have a record of them. So indeed, the Nahuatl language and people have had influence on Mexican Spanish, but it seems mostly in the lexicon. However, morphologically, the differences, which are not super extensive, are almost always across the board, the whole of the Americas, usually similar fashion, causing us to suppose that the changes are due to reasons other than indigenous language impact. So the thought basically is that the changes that have occurred are less about the indigenous people and less about where the language came from, and much more about basically the everyday people using their language in everyday experiences and morphing it to what they need it to be. Thank you.